All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the June 2025 Global Reads webinar, hosted by the South Asia Book Award. My name is Andrea Fowler. I'm the Assistant Director at the Center for South Asia at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My colleague Essie Lenchner and I serve as co-administrators for the Book Award, and Essie and I will be monitoring the chat through today's event. So if you have questions for our presenters or any technical problems, please feel free to reach out to us and drop those questions and comments in the chat as we go. The South Asia Book Award is supported by the South Asia National Outreach Consortium and given annually for up to 3 outstanding works of children's and young adult literature, which accurately and skillfully portray the experience of individuals living in South Asia or of South Asians living in other parts of the world. Honor books and highly commended books are also recognized by the committee for their contribution to this body of literature on the region. A complete list of all recognized titles, going back to our first award year in 2010, is available on our website, southasiabookaward.wisc.edu. And Essie has just dropped a link to that in our chat. Also on our Book Award website, you can join our email list to stay informed of upcoming Meet the Author events like today, or request assistance with facilitating such an event for your local library or school. And an announcement of newly recognized books should be released before the end of the summer. And I'm also happy to say that we'll be sending very soon Ruchira her award package that has her plaque for her recognition this year and a few other little Saba goodies. So that'll be coming her way very soon. Sitting in my office, ready to ship as we speak. So today's event will include approximately 40 minutes of presentation, followed by Q&A. As I mentioned before, please add your questions and comments in the chat as we go through today's event. And after the presentation, we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. Today's webinar will be facilitated by Dr. Ritu Radhakrishnan, Professor of Curriculum and Instruction at SUNY Oswego and incoming chair of the South Asia Book Award Committee. And it is my pleasure to turn over the proceedings to Dr. Radhakrishnan.
Thank you all for joining, and I see some of my students, so I'm so excited you're here. This book is amazing, and I actually came across it in my Oswego City Public Library, which is, for those of you that know Oswego, it's a little town, and it was unheard of for me to see it in the library. So I read it before it came on our list, and I think that's really important to contextualize that it has a following in the United States. And we're going to talk to Ruchira a little bit more about how it came about and where the origins came. So please feel free to put any questions in the chat. I did want to give a trigger warning because the book is about sexual assault and violence. If you need to take care of yourselves and step away from some of the conversations, please do. We'll start with an introduction to Ruchira and then the evolution of I Kick and I Fly. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the agency that the women have, the girls and women have in the book, and ways to bring it into your classroom. And then we're going to get a glimpse of what's next coming up in a couple months from Ruchira. So without further ado, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. So pleased to be here to discuss the South Asia Book Award with all of you. This is one award that I truly cherish because I know it's been juried by people who are in academia and who are thinking about what can reach young people and how curriculum should be shaped. And how do we have difficult conversations on topics which are relevant all around us and still make it truthful and hopeful. So I'm truly grateful to Andrea Fowler and Professor Radhakrishnan for doing this seminar, but also for giving me this award, which puts a spotlight on the book. And it's really important to do that. A little bit about myself. How did I come to write this book? I used to be a journalist, and this is 25 years ago. And I was hiking in the hills of Nepal when I came across rows of villages which had no girls from age 15 to 45. And I asked the people drinking tea and playing cards under the trees, mostly men, older men, that where the girls were. And they said, don't you know, they all are in Mumbai. Now, if any of you have been to Nepal, you know how remote the villages can be. And village women even have to walk to the highway for 2 hours to catch a bus. So I couldn't understand how they could be in Mumbai. I followed the trail and I found little girls on display in cages for customers who would come and buy them to rape them essentially for 30 cents, 40 cents. And I was shocked. First, I started crying. I sat down on the sidewalk. And then I took a deep breath and I thought, actually, I'm going to do something about it. I was angry, I was upset. And because I was a journalist, the first thing I did was make a story, tell the story, make a documentary. I won an Emmy for Outstanding Investigative Journalism for the documentary. But when I was on stage in New York at the Broadway Marquis Hotel, all I could see beyond the bright lights were the eyes of the women in the brothels who had told me their stories. So, in that second, I decided I'm not going to use my Emmy to build a career in journalism. I'm going to use my Emmy to make a difference. So I stepped off the stage and I turned to the lady who'd given me the award. And that time it was Donna Shalala, the US Secretary of State for Health. And I said, giving me an award is not enough. Can't you do more? And she said, what do you want? And I said, I want laws to change. I want those who are buying and selling girls to be punished. I want governments to put in budgets and notice these girls, make them visible, invest in increasing their choices. And something worked because Donna Shalala then connected me to the Clinton White House, and they in turn connected me to a Republican and a Democratic senator. And with their help, I was able to show my documentary at the United Nations and to the US Senate and testify about the kind of law which we needed. And I was 20 something. I had no idea that I could do it, but I did it just by doing it. And that's how my journey began. But and it led to the passage of the US Trafficking Victim Protection Act and to the UN Protocol to End Trafficking in Persons. As I spoke to the senators and Republicans, I went and testified to the US Senate, spoke to the UN, all the member states. But that wasn't enough. I felt, I had to do something for the women I had met in the brothels. And, when I was making The Selling of Innocence, somebody had pulled out a knife at me, Ritu, and said, I won't let you film here. And the women had surrounded me and told the man that if you want to kill her, you've got to kill us first. And the man slunk away. So I saw the power of women's united action in actual practice in that moment. So I had to go back to the women and I had promised them that I would do something. So when I went back, I showed them the award and I said, listen, I've broken the silence. I've got the award. I've told your story. And they said, no, 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 it's not enough. You need to do more. And I said, what? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a social worker. All I am is a journalist. I know how to tell the story. And they said, what about helping with educating our children? So I said, yes, I can help, but the battle is not just mine. I will do what I can, but it's yours because you are the mothers, you have been victimized, and now you're trying to save your children from the same destiny. They said, of course. And I reminded them of the time when they had saved me. And I said, you do have the power if we all do this together. And that's how we set up an NGO and we called it Apne Aap, which means self action in Hindi. And it had two English words, women worldwide, because we believed in feminist solidarity and building bridges across the world for common causes. So we created this and we hired a room in the red light district, got a teacher, put a straw mat on the floor, and began teaching. Fast forward, we realized that many of the women in the red light areas and the children became okay, ready to go to school. We negotiated with the principal who first refused to admit the kids and said that these are children of prostitutes. And we formed our first women's group and went collectively to bargain with the principal, saying these are our children too. He relented. And fast forward now, we set up Apne Aap centers, community classrooms across India, and began educating more and more children, organizing women into more and more women's groups. and fighting for rights and justice, and in the form of three things, which I love to say: learning, livelihood, and legal rights, legal protection. Because education became the keystone for everything else. And livelihoods, of course, because when women tried to exit prostitution, they had nothing to eat. Or when the upper caste gangs came and forced them to put their daughters into prostitution, one of the reasons was they would take advantage of their absence of choices, meaning they didn't have food, they didn't have clothes, they didn't have housing, they didn't have jobs, nothing, no healthcare. So I worked through all of this with the women. And also, we realized that the most of the prostituted and trafficked women all came from very marginalized groups. In India, they're called castes, caste. And not just were they from marginalized castes, but inside castes, they were given a label under British colonialism called criminal tribes. So, whole nomadic tribes in South Asia had been labeled criminal just because they lived in forests and the British wanted the forests. And they wanted to ban them from their livelihoods because British wanted to replace their merchandise with made in England products. And they banned them from moving from place to place because they thought they might trade secretly. And so these people squatted on government lands and in zamindari lands, lands by landlords, owned by landlords. And they were forced to do menial chores, including being sexually available, to the point that these tribes began to believe that prostitution is intergenerational 100 years later. So when India became independent, we removed this horrible law called Criminal Tribe Act, but the stigma remained, the poverty remained, the intergenerational trauma remained. And Apne Aap began to work among such groups then. And I found that these girls, with a little bit of help, could succeed. They need not be written off. And my NGO actually made interventions, taking on criminals, building higher walls in our schools so that the criminals would not jump over to kidnap our girls, changing culture, because the administration, the townspeople would say, oh, these are pimps and prostitutes, you can't help them. And I said, I will. And, it just went on and on. Sometimes we faced death threats. Sometimes we faced just shunning from townspeople and resources. So this is that story. Because when COVID hit, Ritu, I realized that, I have a story of hope against all odds to share. And I wrote it then.
That's great. I'm hoping that this will play. I'm going to play everyone a little bit of Ruchira's The Selling of Innocence, just the beginning. And I will also uh, put the link in the chat so that you're able to watch the whole thing on your own. But I just wanted you to see how she framed that. And then there's a video of Ruchira in the field that really shows sort of the evolution of how her work has moved the community and moved the young women and girls that were almost victims, but have become resilient in the face of all of this. So I'll just play a couple minutes.
At this moment, thousands of men are cruising for prostitutes. Often they are looking for children who are more easily available in poor countries such as Nepal and India. The internet has become a tool for accessing detailed information of specific cities, special districts, even city streets where underage brothels can be found. These children are valued commodities in the sex traffic industry. This is their story.
Gonna stop there because it's buffering a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about and we'll get into how this led into your book, but about the shooting the documentary, and what you saw and what you realized.
Yeah. So, when I went to make the documentary, as I said earlier, I had no idea that something like this existed. My mother's parents lived in Mumbai, and their home was in a very posh part of Mumbai, just a few kilometers away from where these children were on display in cages. But all the time that I went for summer holidays, I never saw these kids till I went looking. And then I realized that how a problem can be in plain sight but invisible, and how we can shut things out just to normalize our own existence. And then when I began filming there, I saw how people can live in the most terrible situations. These brothels were like, rickety wooden houses, 2 stories high, 3 stories sometimes, and one staircase with 20 rooms in a row, with 4 or 5 beds each, a door guarded by a muscle man or a brothel manager, iron bars in the window, and the children would have to sleep under the bed while the mothers would service the customers or clients or johns, whatever you call them. And the beds were kept on bricks, so there would be enough place for the children to sleep even while their mother was being raped. And there was constant noise of fighting, shouting, crying, haggling, vendors all the time. It was hot because the rooms were so stuffy and with just tiny windows, and that too with iron bars. And people coming and going all the time, rats on the floor. And only one escape route: out of the door, which was guarded, down the stairs, which had eyes watching all the time. And so it really was a prison, and there were no handcuffs, but there was hardly any movement. And there were women and men who would sit at the door and charge money for customers who would go in. And girls were between the ages of 9 and 13. So there was no movement, nothing for anyone going in or out.
And if you can, for those of you in the audience, if you can direct your eyes to the bottom left corner, this is a video of Ruchira in the field, and this is your work with Apna Up.
Yes,
And
that's
can you
right.
talk us through what we're seeing and how that's connected to I Kick and I Fight?
Yeah. So, when I saw what was going on in the brothels, I was as I told you, that I started then, making the documentary, and then I established Apne. And then we realized very quickly that, because I was not a social worker, I didn't even come from a corporate background, I didn't know how to make a business plan. So I asked the women, I said, what do you want? And they said, we have 4 dreams. And the first dream was, they said, school for our children. Because whatever has happened to us has happened, but we want to save our daughters from the same destiny. Second dream was a job in an office. And I've just described what a brothel was like. So you can, how far was a job in an office from that? And third thing was a room of their own. And this was like, I was an English literature student, so I was listening to Virginia Woolf and the brothels of Mumbai. And I could understand that, because customers would sometimes molest the children when with the mothers. Many of the women suffered from insomnia because customers could walk in night or day. There was no privacy, there was no time limit to when they could be used, nothing. So, of course, they wanted a room of their own. And the fourth was they wanted justice, which was punishment of those who had bought them and sold them. So, those dreams really became our business plan. And apnea does go into community, into red light districts, which is a string of brothels with girls like this inside, kept inside. And we open a community classroom first. And then we go door to door into the brothels, asking the mothers that, would you put your children into our classroom? So initially, we don't upset the status quo that much because the brothel managers think, oh, we'll take care of the kids while the mothers are busy. So they don't mind. Then we start organizing the women into mothers groups. And then from the mothers group, then they become self-empowerment groups, self-action groups. That's the meaning of apnea. And we then teach them how to fill up forms, get most of the women are undocumented, no birth certificates, no voter ID cards. So we help them get all that, open bank accounts, teach them about savings and loans, and also some skills. And that's when they begin to face backlash. So they get beaten black and blue or threatened, or the children are held hostage. So that's when Apne team members then teach them how to file a police complaint, go to court and testify. And finally, we have managed to put 64 traffickers in jail, two of them the first ever life imprisonment in India. And, more than 1,400 kids from red light areas have finished not just school, but college, and are continuing, and many have jobs, as doctors, teachers, gas station attendants, and Domino's pizza parlor managers, etc. So their lives have improved. They help their mothers by taking them out of the red light areas, and so it's a step-by-step solution. It's holistic, it's intergenerational, it takes on crime, but it also provides alternatives in a positive way. The women are not put into shelters, the traffickers are put into jail. And so in Forbesganj, in the red light area that I write about, in I Kick and I Fly, that's exactly what we did. And when we began work there were 372 brothels. And today there are just two out, and only 6 women in prostitution. When we began, we done a count, and there were hundreds of women in prostitution. So, and it's not, but we've turned the red light area into a green light area. Just today, I had a wonderful meeting in Forbesganj in that red light area where we actually opened a library for the youth over there. And this is like a state of the art library. We always try to keep books and stuff there, but we could not do more. Today, we have put in a Wi-Fi connection for a whole year. We have 5 desktops, 7 iPads, 500 new books, bookcases, and kids are coming and going today. They were all online and they were doing YouTube tutorials on chemistry. I was looking at what the girls were studying. And it was such a lively atmosphere today, because at last, right in their neighborhood, they have access to books and to data and to Wi-Fi. And so they'll probably become the next generation of data scientists and coders. And that's happening in the red light, in the place which used to be a red light area. And this is the story I tell in the book. And Heera, my character, who's a 12-year-old girl, who's born in such a tribe, in a denotified tribe, and is being groomed to be sold into prostitution. She's expelled from school and she's hungry. Her family is hungry. And, she doesn't know where her next meal will come from. Her father wants to sell her. The carnival is about to come to town. And luckily for her, a women's rights activist enrolls her in a kung fu program. So some of the videos you saw were of the girls doing kung fu in the red light area. And this was a super important breakthrough in apnea, because when the girls began to do kung fu, they wore uniform, they won gold medals, they began to like their own bodies. So the way they walked, their shoulders opened up, they didn't stoop to hide their breasts, and what they thought about themselves changed as the townsfolk, because they began to bring in medals and stuff, began to respect them. So, change happened girl by girl, and I saw it. And through this process of karate and kung fu and self respect, along with, of course, helping with the basic needs, that women and girls wanted and needed. And so I Kick and I Fly is a composite story of such girls who I saw, who I witnessed, experienced, helped, and the school that we ran against all odds to keep these girls safe and get an education, and the community which changed, and how this community came together against organized crime. The most powerless people, and yet they did it. And just with a little bit of help from my NGO.
Yeah. And I think, Heera, for those of you that have read it, it's not that she doesn't have doubts. It's not that she's not scared, but it's not that each of them scared, but collectively they work together. And there's power in that story and the way that you brought it together. Can you tell us a little bit about the NAT community? And for those of you that are familiar with the caste system, this is a term that isn't necessarily known outside of the community itself. But how did the red light district become? You talked a little bit about when the British left, that there was not a lot of power left for this community. So can you talk a little bit about the NAT community?
So the Nut community were basically traditionally people, they were nomadic groups who lived in the forests, and they were very good at making indigenous medicine from forest produce. They were also good at making dairy products because they kept goat and sheep, and they would come down the mountains and sell those the dairy products. And plus, they were also good at working with rope, so they would be very well known for making rope bridges and bamboo bridges. As the British banned them from living in the forests and also banned them from selling the indigenous medicine, because they said, you all are quacks and we'll sell GlaxoSmithKline. Then they banned them from also making bridges because the Scottish engineering firms were coming in. So everything they knew was removed, their land was taken away, and they began to, and they were squatters on government land or on land of landlords. So they basically had to do menial chores, but they also started using the skills they knew for entertainment. So the bamboo and rope became ways for them to become performance artists, to keep the people whose land they were staying in happy. And they also, men became pimps because they were asked to produce their sisters and make them sexually available. And so pimping was passed down from father to daughter, and prostitution from mother to daughter. And then, they had to normalize what was happening in their lives. There was so much trauma. So they created rituals around the selling of their daughters. So one of the rituals I describe in I Kick and I Fly is how they get the girl married to a banana tree before auctioning her to the highest bidder on a full moon night in a traveling carnival which comes into town every year. And these practices still happen in other parts of India. In Forbisganj, we not only changed the practice by putting traffickers in jail and the girls in school and women connected to bank loans and livelihood skills, but what we also did was that we petitioned the government to say we don't want this carnival to come, because all it's not selling cattle or anything for the farmers, it's only selling girls. And so on the land where the carnival used to come, now we've created a stadium where kids can take part in sports. Girls like Heera can come and put up kung fu demonstrations and take part in kung fu competitions and other sports. So this is what the nut community was. And the red light district was because they were living as squatters. So many of the red light districts is on squatting land. It's like either along railway tracks or in swamps and marshes, which is common government land, but nobody's using it for anything. So they don't really own it. They're just squatters, and they keep getting evicted, whenever the government needs the land. And as the British got more entrenched in India, what happened was the syphilis began to spread among the British soldiers and clerks. So they passed two laws again in British Parliament. One was called the Contagious Diseases Act, and the other was called the Cantonment Act. Now, the Contagious Diseases Act, funnily enough, was to protect British soldiers and clerks from syphilis. And They didn't think about the women at all because they were mostly all these women, who used to live in the forests, and they were denotified. They were criminal tribes, nobody cared about them. So they put them into these brothels. What they did was, under this Contagious Diseases Act, they created brothel districts just close to the cantonments. And they gave licenses to the brothels, and each brothel would display the license on its door with a red light shining over it. And that's how the word red light district came into being. And basically, a license was given if the women in the brothel were disease free. So they had to just go to a municipal hospital and get checked every time. And many of the AIDS prevention programs right now are exactly the same. They give out condoms to the Johns and the customers, but they don't care what happens to the women and girls. It's
Yeah.
so patriarchal.
It's entrenched. And so even when, you talked a little bit about the Criminal Tribal Act, even as that goes away, the effects are still there, not just the stigma, but the practices of
Yeah.
being oppressing women within that system. Are there other ways that we're seeing the Criminal Tribal Act other than with the prostitution? Are there things within the government or at policies that we're seeing in India?
Yeah, so if there's a theft in the neighborhood, or if there's robbery or anything like that, the first people who are picked up will be people from these tribes. When India became independent, India got rid of the Criminal Tribe Act because Nehru said there's no such thing. No one is born a criminal. But the stigma and the discrimination remained. So the police went and rounded up indiscriminately men from these communities. And even now, you will keep reading about, like, so and so was lynched. And then you just have to dig a little deeper, and you'll find that person who was lynched was from such a community. So vigilante justice takes over, and it is justified when people are from these communities.
Yeah,
And they're just blamed for being, and there are 16 such groups in India, not just the nuts, who are suffering and trapped in intergenerational prostitution, what I described, prostitution passed down from mother to daughter. And the entire clan and the community will be told, this is your destiny. And nobody comes forward to do anything. The school will not admit these children. The people who have factories and shops and all will not employ people from such communities. Nobody will sell them land. They don't have documents. They don't have access to food coupons, housing vouchers, because since they don't have documents, they don't exist. And so this is the community that we made sure that everyone had their documents, everyone opened a bank account, their kids were enrolled in school. And that's the story I say in I Kick and I Fly. And now the townspeople are saying, oh, you did something miraculous. I said, we could have all done it together. You just had to decide it could be done.
Yeah, and you make that clear in the book that there are entitlements or there are opportunities, there are organizations that are willing to help. There is funding available to many people in these communities, but they don't always know about them and they're hidden from
Exactly.
them.
And
Giving
this
them
is
that.
true, Ritu, I also worked in the UN for 10 years in different parts of the world, including in the United States. And, I've noticed that poverty very often is intergenerational, right? And one of the things is that sometimes, you can be poor because you're marginalized, or you become marginalized because you're poor, right? But then you don't even know what is out there for you. You don't even know how to access it. And this is universally true. So there has to be a little bit of a catalyst, something, that extra mile for the last girl. I call the girls in the brothels the last girl because to me, she's the poorest of the poor, the most vulnerable of all human beings, because she's poor, she's female, she's a teenager, and on top of that, she's from a marginalized group or caste, maybe an ethnic community. In America, she could be Native American or Black. But it's her life is marked by absence of choices, right? From food to clothing to stable housing, even legal protection. The police may not come forward to protect her. Or even if you complain that someone is missing in such communities, action will be taken much later. So, how can we connect the marginalized communities to the entitlements And the word entitlement is very good because it means that you're entitled to it. So how do you connect them? Because ignorance also and trauma play a role in not being able to access, right? And sometimes, our imagination does not reach that they may not know how to catch a bus, or they may not have the money to catch a bus, etc. So somebody has to be the catalyst. And that's why we've created a program which is very flexible and adaptable, which can be used in any anti-poverty program across the world. And we call it the 10 asset program. And I describe it in my author's note in I Kick and I Fly. And basically, it is how can you help a community access what are its entitlements? And it has to be intergenerational, it has to be holistic, it has to be long term, because you can't just go give a pill. It's people's lives we are dealing with.
Well, and I think that's the thing, like we have to see things can be consistent, like you said. It can't be a one-time intervention because if it's intergenerational, we have to see this continue. And people have that availability, and that's where some of the government organizations need to help. But I did want to talk about how the book is being received in India. I wasn't sure, it's one thing for us to pass it along in the United States. It's quite another thing in India where there are still patriarchal notions. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's being received?
It's been wonderfully received in India too, and it's coming out in Hindi, Bengali, and Urdu next month. And because there's such a demand for it in languages where the last girls can read them and their teachers to explain to them and talk to them about it. So that's going to be really amazing. For 2 years, I've been on the road with this book between the US and India because I keep getting invited to schools, colleges, universities to talk about the book, to read from the book. And in India, it's happened that I've been invited 3 times by the same college saying, "Oh, you came only once. Can you come again? We need to discuss this again." So it's definitely got a great reception. The sales have been phenomenal, still selling. My friends told me this was my debut novel, right? So when the book came out, my friend said, every book has a shelf life of 6 months. And this is Ritu Menon, who knows publishing. She started Kali. And I said, oh, just 6 months. I want the conversation to go on for a long time because this is written with all my heart about something we can do and what's happening to girls. And, I felt there was a universal message I had in the book. Like, in the book, I talk about things in the third person of Heera. Very extreme situation. She's born dirt poor, no food in the house. She's fighting for an egg, no shoes, right? A leaking roof, expelled from school. Very, very extreme. Very, but on the other hand, through the third person of Heera, all of us can discuss either with young adults we know or with each other or young adults between each other, issues which are in every young adult's life, including in America, and this is complicated family relationships. Look at Hira's relationship with her father. He wants to sell her and then eventually he's proud of her and saves her from being kidnapped, right? How does that arc go? Because the arc of the father is the the roundest in my book, right? And then the the idea of body shaming, it's something universal again, right? Every kid, and the idea of bullying, the idea of being bullied for your body. Teen mental health is such a big problem right now in the US, in Europe, in India, everywhere. And one of the reasons is body shaming and bullying, right? And so my book also helps to talk about bullying and body shaming. And kids realize by reading about Heera that they are not crazy. The system is crazy. And how also you can form small groups in very powerless situations and stand up to injustice. So, and these are all real, it's based on truth. So, the several messages that young readers can take away, girls, women, boys, like there's a fantastic relationship I've created between Heera and her brother Salman, who's a kind boy. He's doing very well in school, but there's no science lab in his school, and he wants to be a scientist. And he even then thinks of dropping out of school so he can become a porter. And, maybe his father won't sell her because then he'll bring money home. And that's such a beautiful relationship. And then, of course, her relationship with her best friend in school who goes missing, the best friend's brother who used to be her friend but then becomes the bully, how he beats her up, teases her, but then how he changes, right? So I also have tried to show through the book another message is that no one is just what they are in that moment. There is that possibility of redemption and change, and human beings follow many arcs. So I want young people not to judge each other, but to work with each other and to know that whatever size, shape their bodies are powerful. And that's why Kung Fu, because Kung Fu, I have a lot of messages between Bruce Lee and Heera. And the other thing is that Bruce Lee tells Heera, in his quotations through his books, that be like water, flow, don't crash. And that is really important because sometimes if we become very rigid, we are likely to break. But if we go with the flow, then we might win a battle in the long run. And so that is also a very key message I want young people to know.
And I think that comes across from the book. I chose one quote, but there are several about women being in charge of their own bodies. And as you mentioned, for them to be proud of that. I do want to move on a little bit because in terms of young adult literature, we think about adolescents exploring alternative opportunities for their realities and building knowledge. For those of you that are aware, and I'm pointing at this like you can see my hand, but in 2006, Patricia McCormick wrote a very similar book about Lakshmi, a young girl in Nepal. Lakshmi was saved by a white savior, whereas in this book, Heera and her female power, female group saved themselves. And so I think that's an important change and an important shift that we see, that the book has been written by someone who has been in the community, and that has the same voice and the same understanding of the caste system and how it is. How have you seen more people like Greenie D popping up? Have you seen Greenie D is the one that brought Heera to the Kung Fu and got her back in school after she was kicked out. Are you seeing more NGOs and are you seeing more women taking an active role in working down these barriers in India?
So, it's basically Patricia's story was true for its time because at that time, there were people coming in from different parts of the world and trying to kick down a door and get a girl out. But, the fact is that the red light area stayed. Nothing changed. They would bring in more girls, and the men who came would go away. We didn't know who they were, nothing. So over time, of course, and especially people like me who are feminist socialists, we wanted the world to be equal and also have our own agency in the process, right? So we wanted to try different things and we succeeded, right? So and that success had to be projected, right? Because if people don't know about it, they'll keep believing that old narrative that there's going to be always a white male savior, which is actually not true. There is no such thing. I promise you, there is no such thing and I have worked in the UN in 40 different countries, and there is no such thing as a white male savior except in movies. And so I wanted to bring truth to the people that, no one's going to come from the top, and he's not going to be some man and some white man flying down or something. It's going to be us, each other, wherever we are. And so I created a narrative based on truth, which was a brown girl. She's not male, she's a girl. She's not white, she's brown. And she's not an adult, she's a teenager. And how she has to actually stand up on her own 2 feet with a little help from friends. There's a community around her. It's not one person who creates the rescue or saves the situation or anything. It's just this whole group coming together, which is very true of real life too. There's no such thing literally as a white male savior. And I would ask all your students who are listening that if they have any examples of white male saviors, to think about it, and do they know any? Literally, they don't exist. This is my real, except maybe Batman or something, but not in real life. I've never
Yeah.
come across.
Um, and so I also wanted to think about for those of you that are teachers, how this might work in your classroom. And I know the topic might be a little bit difficult, but it gives students and readers a sense of agency and their ability to think about their own identity as it's shifting in adolescence, exert their voice, and bring difference into the world. And I brought this quote out from an article because you talked about hope and because you talked about you had that novel of hope during the pandemic. Whereas in Sold, Lakshmi was a victim and didn't have the power to make changes, where these two young women are similar ages and they're girls and they're given agency by other people. And I think that's important to think about as we choose literature in the classroom and as we choose different books. And you talked a little bit about how you were able to evolve Heera's story. I'm speeding up a little bit just because we're running out of time. Do we have any questions, Essie and Andrea, before I kind of talk about ways to include this in the classroom?
We do have a few in the chat, and I know that Ruchira has jumped in where she can here and there, but there are a couple that I would like to highlight that Ruchira hasn't had an opportunity to answer yet. One from Sarah. That Sarah says, thank you for your time today. Congratulations. And though Sarah has not read the book yet, she's wondering what life is like for the brothers and fathers in the villages, and then in the brothels, and then in the schools.
So, it's really hard for them too, because I have met boy after boy who didn't want to become a pimp. They were close to their sisters, they didn't want to they didn't want to watch their sisters being sold, right? So it's very hard. And same thing with the father, and I write about this in the book, that the father first wants to sell her. He's an alcoholic, works for a gang, but when he realizes that he doesn't have to, and this is not the destiny of girls in his tribe, he suddenly changes and does everything he can to save his daughter. And there's a very important conversation between him and Heera, where she says that, why did you want to sell me? Why me? And he says, because I was nastiest with you, because I thought I would have to let you go. He didn't even think there was a possibility of something else. So life is like that for the men in these tribes. They're so beaten down that they can't imagine anything else.
Yeah. And they were all stuck in that way of thinking. And Salman was the only one who had a little bit of hope, and he was the youngest, so it's very clear that the men are entrenched in this way of thinking too, as well.
And they feel trapped too. So, it's funny, like on one hand, they'll be selling planning to sell their daughters or selling their daughters. On the other hand, when I succeed, I can see something change in their eyes,
Yeah.
because they are also controlled by the bigger organized criminal networks
Mhm.
who are much more insensitive.
Yeah. And there's, a level of power that the power keeps going. And so it needs to start, the resistance needs to sometimes start at the bottom. And that we see that in the book with Heera and the collective, and they're working their way up to stop the power that comes across.
Exactly. And I've called my book a social justice adventure, because I want young people to understand that social justice itself is an adventure, and it's kind of fun, And if you read the book, you'll see it's very fast paced. It's told like an adventure story, but that's what life was like, when dealing with these criminals, telling the girls go to school, they are being kidnapped, they're being locked up, they're changing the size of the wall, the height of the wall. Someone is saying, I'll make you 6 inches shorter by cutting off your head, and we are still going as a group holding hands and saying, try cutting all our heads. And, it's been an adventure, and it's been a very rewarding adventure. So I wrote it like an adventure story. And the next book also is exactly like that. I've written it like an adventure story. And so that's why I feel I've created a genre called social justice adventure.
Yeah, and just kind of to bring it in terms of, there were a few questions about the classroom. So thinking about this book as both, when you're reading it, an efferent reading where you're identifying the information, you're getting the history about the British rule in India, you're getting the understanding of the caste system. But then there's the aesthetic reading that Louise Rosenblatt talked about, where you're feeling it, you're living the experience with Heera. And then bringing these two types of readings in the classroom, there are several ways that you can do that. And you can, oops, I think I put, yeah. So, if you're scaffolding understanding of something like the caste system or the British rule, thinking about character sketches, cause and effect, analyses of the conflicts, looking at the current events, both in the US and abroad, we're seeing mirrors of what's happening everywhere. Doing mind maps, giving students an opportunity to just document what they're seeing in that efferent reading, and then moving into multiple modalities, having them incorporate media literacy, infographics with multiple sources, providing understanding of this, because the way Ruchira was able to connect in her community and organize was through these facts and understandings of what's happening, and giving your students that literacy to have the power to have their own social justice adventure. What does that look like? Is it editorials? Is it a gallery walk? Is it making, flyers and things like that? So opening up that way of demonstrating their learning, it brings the reading together in a powerful way. And because she talks about it as a social justice journey, well, I called it journey, but an adventure. But it's this critical pedagogical application where students are taking what they learn and applying it to authentic experiences within the communities. So here I had a pen pal. It's so much easier these days to create pen pals, extending the learning of cultural, political, and social practices, and ways to support these practices and giving engagement in the classroom. So these are just some of the ideas I was thinking about when bringing this book to life. Again, and I know that for those of you in classrooms, you'll have to write a letter home. You'll have to be, have the protections in place. But please, think about having it in your classroom in a genre, having it as part of a connection to the way that we see imperialism, the way that we see colonialism and settlerism. It it's all connected. Oops. And then before I do that, there is a discussion guide that Ruchira has, and I'm gonna have Andrea send out these slides. So, and some instructional resources for developing cultural understanding of what's
Yeah.
happening, because the caste system is very entrenched in this. And if you're on the outside, it's not the same as classism necessarily in the United States. It's a little more deeply entrenched in the country. So I had a text set that could give you some connections. Sold is obviously one of them. Amal Unbound, which is by Aisha Saeed, but talks about involuntary servitude, and you see the same kind of relationships within systems of power. A Thousand Questions is a middle grades book, but it has two young middle schoolers. One is a maid, and one is a visiting United States citizen, and how their friendship can happen. And this one always speaks to me because when I visited India when I was 7, my only friend was the maid, and I was told I couldn't talk to her. So there's, these are so old and so entrenched, these stories, that they happen to all of us. Meet Me in Mumbai, you see the same sort of, it's a woman who gets pregnant in the United States, an Indian woman, but again, you still see sort of the cultural expectations and the understandings. And this can kind of round out the way that Heera's role is in I Kick and I Fly. And I couldn't find a really good picture book for understanding the caste system, but I did find From Priests to Untouchables that gives you just an overview of the caste system. But I did want to give Ruchira a chance to talk a little bit about the book coming out. I did
Ah,
pre-order it, but it's very exciting. And I'll put the little map so you can tell them about the next social justice adventure.
Yes, so here it is. I have the uncorrected proof. It's coming out on 5th of August, and it's about a 12-year-old girl called Simi, who's born of a Sikh father, the men who wear turbans and are farmers and taxi drivers in the United States, many of them you will see. And her mother is Muslim, so she's born of an interfaith marriage, and there's a group that doesn't like interfaith marriage, so they literally beat up her father, and the family has to escape India. The father gets political asylum in the US, but the mother and the daughter don't, so they pay smugglers to bring them in. And the story is about how they cross the Mexico border through the Arizona desert, the Sonoran desert, taking on the coyotes. The coyotes are smugglers, and the harsh desert with no water. And they eventually get separated, and Simi has to navigate a border detention camp, a private contractor shelter, and find ways of understanding foreign languages, foreign bureaucracies, to find her mother and reunite with her father. So the story really is about migration, about refugees, but also about safety and home and family. And again, it's about hope, because what keeps Simi going when everything seems to be changing around her? She's 12, she's a hockey player, she's the captain of a hockey team, and suddenly she has to leave it all behind, and how she creates home again. So this is that story.
Yes, and it's timely, and I'll be working with Ruchira on bringing it to the classroom for those of you that are in states where Asian American history is taught, thinking about ways to bring it not just standards-based, but connecting it, unfortunately, to current events that are happening today.
And Ritu, I was just thinking, I said, what does this book do? Because there's no one who's there's no evil person in this book. There are indifferent people, but there's no one evil. And so, no stereotype is there. And like a border guard is kind to her because he's thinking about his daughter, and that makes all the difference to Simi. Or someone in a shelter helps her through a lesson, in English when she has to actually be home for something else. So, people giving water to each other, mothers helping children who are not their own, as they migrate together, the friendships inside shelters. So everyone has small acts of kindness, and they go a long way. So I again try to show that it's not individuals who are caught in a system who are bad people. It's a bad policy decision somewhere way beyond their ambit. So instead of attacking each other, we should see how we can unite and find a voice to change a system.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect place to end as we conclude the webinar. But thank you so much for joining us, for writing these books, because they're so timely and so what we need. And thank you all for joining us, because I think it shows how everyone coming together, we can bring a little bit of power back to all of us.
And may I thank all of you, Andrea and Ritu, and everyone else who has, first of all, given me an award for this book, because it means so much. It's my first novel ever. And to know that, strangers in across the states have read it and like it, and you're holding a seminar on it, means a lot to me. And it means that my message in a bottle is there, out there somewhere for people to find and read. So thank you so much. And I look forward to, I know this is going to be a timely book, but I also know there's going to be lots of things going on around me. So help me spread the word and pre-order the book if you can, because pre-order does matter in making a book succeed.
And I put the little, I hope you were able to see the QR code. I did do it to bookshop.org, not the other place, but so you can go to your local independent bookseller. That would be wonderful.
How about we'll include the bookshop link in the email that everyone here will receive in the coming days, so that you can access and consider pre-ordering this book, which I'm also really excited to read. This has been incredible. I just want to say truly from the bottom of my heart, this hearing you, Ruchira and Ritu, discuss this and all the incredible work you do, and how many lives you've touched and significantly improved. I'm just really in awe, and I hope we get to see you again and spend more time together in whatever format that may be. Speaking of which, thank you so much for sharing your contact info. I believe you're looking for interns, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Amazing, great. So if you'd like, I can also include a little note about that in the email, but I'll chat with you later about how you'd like that to be presented, but for those who want to share the word. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention that today's event recording will not show your face unless you spoke up. So do not worry about being captured in the recording, and it will be shared in the post-event email along with Ritu's slides and all the resources and links that have been shared today. So with gratitude to our speakers, to our moderator, Ritu, and to everyone for being so active and engaged in the chat. We really, really appreciate it. And before I say goodbye, oh yes, if you're interested in connecting with Ruchira or bring her to your classroom, Ruchira, I hope you're okay with me saying this.
Yes,
Feel free to, okay, great. Feel free to contact Ruchira or us. We're more than happy to coordinate visits with any of our Saba Award winners at any time. And I suspect Ruchira would make a really excellent one for many, many students. So feel free to reach out. I will just pop in the contact info for the South Asia Book Award again here at the bottom. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next space. So thank you.